Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaste. Today we will continue with our discussion on canopy attributes. Here is a recommended reading for you. So, now let us begin our discussion. So, we know the importance of canopy, but how do we take measurements of the canopy is what we are going to look at in this class and the next class. So, if we look at this figure, so here you can see an observer who is trying to take the measurement of this tree canopy. The person needs to stand at the grade level, that is the ground level, or on an upslope position. The distance from the tree should be approximately half to one tree lengths away, so that the whole canopy is visible from that point. In the bottom chart you can see where the crew members need to stand if you need to take two measurements. So, for instance, if this is your canopy, we take measurements at 90 degrees. So, suppose this is your tree stem. If you take one measurement along this direction, the other measurement has to be at 90 degrees from the first measurement. So, what do we measure? We measure a number of attributes. So, the first attribute for the crown is known as the vigor class. Now, a vigor class is a visual assessment of the crown vigor of saplings. Now, what is vigor? Vigor refers to the amount of energy that a sapling has, which will allow it to grow. So, if a sapling has a lot of vigor, it will be able to grow at a very fast rate, it will be a healthy sapling, whereas a sapling with a low vigor would not be able to grow at a very fast rate. So, vigor class is a visual assessment of the crown vigor of saplings. So, it is used for the case of saplings. So, this is not for whole trees, it is for the small plants, saplings. The purpose of this classification is to distinguish between excellent saplings with superior crowns and stressed individuals with poor crowns. So, as we said, as we discussed before, if a sapling has a good crown, then it will be called an excellent sapling. Why? Because consider a small plant and suppose it has a good crown. So, a good crown will tell us that it has abundant rate of photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis is the reaction by which sunlight gets converted into biomass. So, this is the process of photosynthesis. So, when it is converted into biomass, this biomass is in the form of sugars or carbohydrates, and these carbohydrates are then used for getting energy through the process of respiration and for growth, because these sugars will then be distributed to the various parts of the plant, which would allow it to grow to a greater height or maybe thicken its stem. A very simple reaction of photosynthesis could be carbon dioxide, which is taken from the air, plus water that is taken from the ground through using the sunlight, and through the process of photosynthesis it gets converted into sugar, for instance glucose, plus oxygen is given out. Now, if we balance this equation, it is C6, so we have 6 CO2, H12, so 6 H2O, here we have 12 oxygens, here we have 6 oxygens, here we have 6 oxygens, so here we need to have 12 oxygens, so it will give you 6 O2, that is 6 moles of carbon dioxide plus 6 moles of water utilizing the sunlight and through the process of photosynthesis will make 1 mole of glucose and will give out 6 moles of oxygen, which is why trees are able to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and release oxygen. Now, taking this carbon dioxide is also important in the case of carbon fixation. So, carbon fixation is the process in which this carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is fixed into biomass. So, for instance, this sugar is a biomass. It might later be polymerized or maybe converted into other biomass. For instance, it can make cellulose, it can make lignin, it can make pectin and a number of other components of the plant cell. So, components of a plant and a number of other such molecules. Now, when we talk about vigor, we have seen that if we have a plant that has a small crown and if we compare it with another plant maybe of the same size, but with a much bigger crown. So, in this case, this will be able to, because it has more number of leaves or more surface area exposed to air and sunlight. So, the amount of photosynthesis, because remember that in the process of photosynthesis you need carbon dioxide from the air. So, you need lots of areas that are exposed and you require sunlight, which also means that you should have more and more area exposed to the sunlight. So, it will have more photosynthesis and so this will give you a greater vigor. Now, coming back to the slide. So, the vigor class, the purpose of this classification is to distinguish between excellent saplings with superior crowns and stressed individuals with poor crowns. So, we divide these saplings into 3 classes. The first class is called the vigorous class. Here the saplings must have an uncompacted live crown ratio of at least 35% and less than 5% dieback. Also 80% or more of the leaves present must be undamaged. So, now we can see here that it is vigorous when the uncompacted live crown ratio is at least 35%, which means, now coming back to the tablet, it means that if we have this as the total length, if we take the crown length and take the ratio crown length upon, or maybe let us call it the height of the tree, then we will have crown length by h into 100%, that should be greater than 35% in the case of class 1 saplings. Also it should have less than 5% dieback. Now, dieback is a condition in which the leaves of the plant or the plant itself, it starts to die from the top of its canopy towards its base. So, it is dying in a backward direction, which is why it is called a dieback. It should have less than 5% dieback. Also 80% or more of the leaves present must be undamaged. So, we have greater than 80% undamaged leaves. Now, what does this tell us? One, by using this live crown ratio, we can say that it has a large canopy. So, we have a large canopy, plus 2, the canopy is not suffering any dieback. So, there is little dieback. So, this canopy is healthy, plus even the tree, even the leaves that are there are healthy. So, we have little damage to leaves. So, it is a large canopy, it is a healthy canopy and even the leaves are healthy. So, if we look back at the slides, so here we are seeing saplings of vigor class 1. So, we can see that the live crown is greater than or equal to 35% of the length and any dieback. So, in this case we do not include any lower diebacks, but we include diebacks that are there in the crown. The second class is the class 3. Now, we have skipped class 2, we will come to class 2 in a short while. So, the second class that we will consider is a class with poor vigor. So, in the case of poor vigor, less than 20% of their leaves are undamaged, or to put it in other words, for class 3 we have greater than 80% leaves that are damaged. Now, if the leaves are damaged, then this plant will not be able to perform photosynthesis properly. So, if we look at figures now, so coming back to the slides, yeah. So, here we are seeing less than 20% normal foliage, or maybe the sapling has a severe defoliation, or maybe every needle or greater than 50% of the needles are chewed. So, this will be called a vigor class 3. So, this could be because this plant has not received proper nutrients, or maybe this plant has not received proper amount of sunlight, or maybe it was infested by some pest or insects, or maybe it was damaged by some diseases. So, in all these cases it would have lost its vigor. So, this sapling will not be able to grow properly when we plant it into the field. Now, the third class, as we can see on the slides now, is the class 2 that we had left before. This is the moderate vigor class. So, any saplings that are not in class 1 or class 3 are put into class 2. Why is that so? Because it is easier to distinguish class 1 saplings and class 3 saplings. So, anything that does not form class 1 or class 3 gets into class 2. So, here we have some examples of class 2. So, in this case we have suppose 40% normal foliage. Now, in the case of class 1 we would have, so coming back to our class 1, we would have had that this crown length upon height is greater than 35%. Now, coming back to the figure, so here we are seeing that 40% of the foliage is normal and with a 35% less than 35% crown length. So, we either have less than 80% undamaged leaves. So, in the case of class 1 we had greater than 80% undamaged leaves. So, in the case of the first plant here we have just 40% normal foliage. So, it will not come under class 1. Similarly, in the case of the second figure it has less than 35% live crown. So, that is why it is not part of class 1. However, it is also not part of class 3, because in the case of class 3 we would have had greater than 80% of the leaves that are damaged, but here we have 40% normal foliage in the case of the first one. In the case of the second one we have all the normal foliage, but just because its live height ratio is less than 35%, so it is not forming part of class 1 or class 3, which is why these are class 2. Now, the moderate vigor class has been made large because the objective is to distinguish between extremely good and poor crowns. So, in the case of poor crowns we are not going to plant them in the field. In the case of extremely good crowns, they will be the first options when we want to plant these saplings into the field, and anything that is not extremely good, that is class 1, or not extremely poor, that is class 3, it comes in the middle. Now, the next thing that we can measure is called the uncompacted live crown ratio. So, it is the ratio of live crown to above ground tree length, which is what we had calculated earlier. Now, why is it called uncompacted? The term uncompacted means that the crown length is not reduced to compensate for gaps between the base of the live crown and the live top of the tree. So, essentially if we have a tree and maybe we do not have anything here, so this is a gap, but we are not going to subtract it from this length, from the canopy length. So, which is why it is called the uncompacted live ratio. Now, coming back to the slides, how is it measured? The uncompacted live crown ratio is recorded in 5% classes and coded as 0, 5, 10, 15, so on up till 100. So, because this is a ratio of crown length upon height into 100%. So, if there is no crown, it will be 0%. If you have, say, a theoretical condition where you have a tree and you have a crown that completely covers it. So, essentially this crown cannot go beneath the ground level. So, in this case you will have the crown length is equal to height, which will give a ratio of 100%. So, this ratio can vary from 0 to 100%, and we divide it into classes which are 0, 5, 10, 15, 20 up till 100%. So, when we write it as classes, we do not write this percentage here, but anything that forms between 1 to 5%. So, anything that comes here between 1 to 5% will be called a class 05, anything that comes from here till here will be called a class 10, and so on. So, how do we measure this ratio? First of all, we establish the live crown top, which is the live foliage nearest to the top of the tree, and here we do not include any dieback or dead branches. So, the first thing that we need to figure out is, in the case of a tree, which is the live crown top. So, which is the position that we will call the top. Next, coming back to the slides, the next step is determine the base of the live crown. Now, base of the live crown is located at the point of the lowest live foliage of the obvious live crown. So, coming back to the tablet now, this point will be called the base of live crown. So, we need to figure out where is the top and where is the base. Next, we need to find out the crown length and the tree height. Now, we have already dealt with tree height, and crown length is this distance. So, this is the crown length, and then we can calculate the ratio. So, let us now look at some figures on how we do that. So, in the first case, so here we have the top of the crown, this one is the base of the crown, and this is the ground level. So, this is the crown length, this is the total height of the tree, and this ratio x by y will give us the live crown ratio. Now, in the case of the second figure, we have removed this branch. So, this is removed by making use of 5-foot rule. So, in the case of a 5-foot rule, if there is any branch that is beneath 5 feet of your main crown, then you will call it as another crown. So, in this case also we can figure out x, y, and then calculate x by y. In this case, we have a crown that is divided into 3 parts, but because these are less than 5 feet, then we would call it one crown. So, here also we can find out x and y. Here on in the top we can see that these branches do not have any leaves. So, these are not live branches. So, which is why when we are trying to figure out this top, it is the top of the highest live branch. Similarly, in this figure we will remove this portion, but in both these situations, in the case of this tree height, this these live branches on the top are also considered. Now, the third figure is obvious. Now, what do we do in the case of trees that are bent? Here also the height and your this length of your crown is measured parallel to the stem axis. So, here your height of this tree or the stem length, to use a more technical term, this is y, here you have x, which is the length of the crown. Similarly, here this is the stem length, and this one is the length of the crown, and by getting this ratio of x by y, we can calculate the live height ratio. The next thing is crown light exposure. Crown light exposure is an estimate of the amount of direct sunlight that reaches the live crown when the sun is directly overhead. So, what do we mean by this? So, let us consider a tree. So, when the sun is completely overhead, at that point how much amount of direct sunlight reaches the live crown is the crown light exposure. We measure it in units of 0 to 5. So, how do we measure it? We consider this crown as a cone. So, if we draw a cone, so we consider the crown to be a cone in this part and we divide it into 5 parts. So, if we took a top view, it would look like this. So, this is the vertex and this is the base. So, now we divide it into 5 parts. So, these are the 4 parts and the 5th part is this vertex. So, now coming back to the slides, yeah. So, here when this tree, when the sun is overhead, we have divided it into 5 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4 and this is the 5th part. Now, any portion that does not receive light is not counted. So, like 1 and 4 here are not counted, 2 is counted because it is receiving full light. In the case of 3, so now consider this portion from here to here. So, in this portion it is not receiving light completely. So, when the sun is overhead, this portion that is shown in the darker colors is receiving a shadow and this portion of section 3 is receiving light. So, if it is not receiving light completely, it will not be counted, but in the case of this top portion, if it is receiving any amount of light, it will be counted. So, this top portion will be counted in this case because it is receiving light in this part and this part. So, here we can say that out of the 5 parts, part 2 is receiving light and the top part is receiving light. So, only 2 parts are receiving light. So, in this case its the value will be 0 to 5, it will be a value of 2. So, what is the use of this crown light exposure? The intended use is that it estimates the amount of direct sunlight to which a tree is exposed. It provides information about the stand structure and competition, tree and stand vigor and growth potential. Why is that so? Because let us consider a stand in which your trees are far apart. So, in this case the first tree will be having a value of 5, the second tree will also be having a value of 5. Whereas, if you now included a few other trees in between, so suppose your stand is very dense, so it grows like this, and similarly on this part and on this part also we are having trees. So, what would happen if you look at the top view of this tree, it would look something like this. So, this is the canopy, it is covered on the right, it is covered on the left, it is covered on the top and it is covered on the bottom by the other canopies. So, what would be this crown light ratio for this tree? We will divide it into 4 parts and the 5th part is the top portion. So, now is this part receiving light completely? No, because this part is shaded, this part is shaded. This one also no. Similarly, this one is also not counted and this one is also not counted. Only this part will be counted. So, this is not receiving complete light, only this portion is receiving complete light. So, in this case the ratio will be 1. So, if you have a lower ratio, then your stand is more dense, there is a lot of competition and the growth of these trees and the growth of the stand will suffer in this case. Now, coming back to the slide, a tree receiving more light typically has less direct competition, thereby increasing its vigor and growth potential. So, that is obvious. The next thing that we can figure out is the crown position. Crown position establishes the location of an individual live crown in relation to its surrounding overstory canopy. So, you want to establish the location of an individual live crown for every tree you can figure out a crown position, in relation to its surroundings over story canopy. Here we divide it into 4 codes. So, code 1 is called superstory, code 2 is overstory, code 3 is understory, and code 4 is an open grown crown. So, how do we figure out this crown position? First of all, we establish the average live crown height for the entire stand, which defines the overstory canopy zone. So, for instance, if you had a tree here, maybe a tree here, another tree here, another tree here, and maybe another tree here. So, all these trees are having different heights and their crowns are also at different heights. So, the first thing is to establish the average live crown height. So, what is the average height that you will figure out? Step 2 in the slides shows that we separate the overstory canopy zone horizontally into halves with an imaginary line going through the middle. So, the average will be divided into 2 parts, 2 halves. Next, we compare each individual tree's crown, live crown top to its midpoint line, and the location of the live crown top relative to this line determines the tree's crown position code. So, now we have 2 lines, one is the average line, one is the 50% of the average line, and we are going to compare all the live crown tops with these 2 lines. So, when do we call it a code 1? For a tree to qualify as a superstory tree or code 1, the live crown top must be twice the height of the top of the overstory canopy zone. So, to show it in a figure, so in this case we have calculated the average line. So, these are all different trees and this is the overstory zone that we have calculated by taking the average heights. Then we have also figured out this line, which is the 50% line. So, now this tree, this large tree with the code of 1 is given this code because its top of the crown is twice this height of the overstory zone. Then we will call it a tree of code 1. The live crown top must be twice the height of the top of the overstory canopy zone. To be coded as an overstory tree or code 2, the live crown top needs to extend past the midline of the overstory canopy zone. That is, if we have this 50% line from here till here, any tree that crosses this portion completely will be called a class 2 tree. For instance, these trees are class 2 trees. An understory crown or code 3 will have its top at or below the midline of the overstory canopy zone. So, the top is going to be at the midline or below the midline, then we will call it a code 3 tree or an understory crown. The open canopy code or code 4 is used for every tree in the stand where an overstory zone is not discernible due to lack of canopy cover and competition. So, for instance, here we only have trees 1, 2 and 3. Here we have trees of position of code 4 as well, because in this case this canopy does not cover the whole bare ground, which is why it is difficult to find out an average canopy height. So, or this average over canopy zone. So, because these trees are not facing any competition whatsoever, we will call them as open canopy trees or code 4 trees. So, by this we can figure out the canopy position. Thank you for your attention. Jai Hind.